Welcome back to your next set of notes. Hopefully the audio is working on this one and I won't have to do it again. But we're going to continue talking on reform. So the other day we talked about reform, temperance or alcohol movement, prison reform, and also education reform. So today is the big reform in the form of anti-slavery, things that needed changed. So let me get the presentation working here. Okie doke. All right, so this is the big reform. This is the big change. It's the anti-slavery. Remember the prefix for anti, it means against, to go against. So these are people who are going against slavery. So these would be your big people who are pushing anti-slavery, and they were called abolitionists. They're called abolitionists. Your root word of abolitionist is abolish, not abolition. Abolish. To abolish means to get rid of. So in this case, they're getting rid of slavery. So your early pioneers, I found this thing online, and here's Henry Ward Beecher, Sumner, Phillips, Greeley, Horace Greeley, Garrison. My problem with this is it's all old white guys. Now, these were not, I mean, they give them credit for being early abolitionists. However, where are the ladies? Where are the white ladies? Where are the black ladies? Where are the African-American men? Where are these people? But it's only showing just the white people. So hopefully from what I said, made it clear a little bit, was that it was not just one group of people that was behind this. It was many people, and not just North, and not just in the South, just everywhere. There were a lot of people who were against slavery. You did have some early founding fathers who were against slavery, Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton. They actually wanted to put lines abolishing slavery into the Declaration of Independence. However, at the time period, the other founding fathers said it's probably not a hill that they wanted to die on right then. So much like in the future, people are just going to keep passing the buck from one group to the next. See, it says, am I not a woman and a sister? They want to put the line specifically that all men are created equal in there, and that it would be referencing African Americans as well, whether it was free or enslaved. And like I said, these founding fathers were like, well, we'll probably pass on that one for now, and so they did. Now that line though is in there, you know, all men are created equal. However, that men, that's the one that's up for debate as to who they thought actually would be the men in that, whether it was mankind or whether it was just, well, men. So for the early part of the 1700s and the 1800s, we know how that actually is. So some states did come into play with this anti-slavery movement. In 1780, Pennsylvania was the first state to end slavery, meaning that they had it and then they got rid of it. And in 1803, Ohio, when we became the first, when we became a state, we're the first state to ban slavery in our state constitution. Now, those were part of the rules in the Northwest Ordinance, if you don't remember, that no slaves coming into the Northwest Territory could have slavery. So we're the first one to come in, so we get that little privilege of being the first one not to have slavery in our Constitution. Now, like I said before, though, we did have some slaves in the southern border, but it was not supposed to be allowable. But I'm not going to paint a perfect picture of Ohio for you because we did have some slaves in the lower parts of Ohio there. So anyways, moving on. So let's talk about some abolitionists. So abolitionists were those people who were progressive against slavery and, you know, did something about it, not just in their head, but also like held meetings, had writings, actually started the Underground Railroad or got slaves out. And that stuff is important because, you know, talk is talk, but actually walking the talk is a little bit different. So we'll start with William Lloyd Garrison. And yes, it is an old white guy, but give me a second. We'll talk about others here too. But William Lloyd Garrison wrote what was called The Liberator. It was an anti-slavery newspaper. So look at that name. What do you think that name is important? Look at liberate. What's liberate mean? Liberate means to free people. So that's the idea of this newspaper, is that it informed people of what was going on in the world. And you can see the date on this one there. It says down at the bottom 1831 right there. So, you know, you're still 30 years away from the American Revolution that people are doing this so far in advance, but you're telling people what's going on. and how slaves are treated, and so that you could give rights to those people. And William Lloyd Garrison also favored full political rights for African Americans, not just being freed, which was pretty controversial at the time period. So it does take people sticking their necks out, especially for whites, because you can get in trouble for this. However, I will always tell you that, a white person telling a black person's story carries weight, but only carries so much weight. On the other hand, you have a guy named Frederick Douglass, whose story has a little more weight because he actually was African American. Frederick Douglass was an escaped slave, was an educated free man, had the ear of Abraham Lincoln when he becomes president, was really one of these voices that's saying, I was there. I can tell you, like me as a historian, I can tell you all about historical things, but it's different than actually being there first person and being able to tell you exactly what life was like. So Douglass goes all throughout the North, was an escaped slave, was a great speaker, what they call an orator at the time period. And he also started his own newspaper called the North Star. Now, anybody want to take a stab as to why it's called the North Star? What does the North Star represent? Brightest star in the sky. Some people are going to the story of Jesus in Bethlehem and seeing the North Star. Okay, kind of true. But in this case, the North Star guided slaves to the north. It was one of their main directional guides for them. So again, both of these having newspapers telling the truth, and probably a little bit of propaganda too, to be honest, but one coming from a white man, one coming from African American, but still both really important. And there's a picture there that shows Frederick Douglass's old post office where the North Star was printed. And there's a picture of the North Star. Sorry, no comics back at the time period, no pictures. Didn't have that really until your 1860s coming. The next guy is John Quincy Adams, JQA. So you should know him because he was a president at one point. But after he's done becoming president, and being president too, he tried to make some changes, including proposing banning slavery in all new states. That would be problematic, especially for any that came in the South, because that's what they wanted. And if you remember, we talked about how they did not want to be told by the government as to whether they could have slaves or not. They wouldn't be able to decide that. So this doesn't get passed, but he really wanted to push that through. But he also becomes important later on because of a story called, this is on page 424 in your book, he defended captives on the Amistad. Now, if you like movies, there's a movie by Steven Spielberg, came out in the 90s, I think, called The Amistad. And it was about, the Amistad, which was a boat. You can see here, I'll give you the little brief part of it. But the Amistad comes into the United States. This is July 1839, when slaves end up overthrowing their people holding them captives on the ship, and the ship ends up coming into the United States. And the African Americans, the enslaved people, were represented by John Quincy Adams as well as others. And the argument becomes, if they are able to fight for their freedom and really kill their captors, yeah, that's right, are they still slaves if they make it to the United States? And so some would argue yes, some would argue no, and there's this whole big court case over it. And in the end, John Quincy Adams is able to help those people on the La Amistad because the Supreme Court decides they were brought in illegally because of prohibition of it in 1808, and therefore they're sent back to Africa. Now, it would be nice if that continued throughout, the rest of the time period, but that did not. But you have, a guy sticking his neck out for African Americans who were taken illegally, and then they end up getting sent back to Africa. Okay, so a little picture here in 1839 of the people uprising against those who had taken them captive. And then you finally get to the UGRR, the Underground Railroad. Now, this is the big thing for the abolitionist movement, but we haven't talked about it yet because it's really not created yet. First of all, it is not underground. It is not a railroad. Okay, it's not a choo-choo train. It is just simply the idea of people escaping through secretive manner. They didn't take a railroad. They might have taken a cart, they might have taken a boat, they might have walked, but anyways, it's just kind of whether it was like a metaphor, an analogy, I don't know, I'm not an English guy. But anyways, It's the idea that it's just something, a secretive way for slaves to be able to get from the south to the north. I like this map because you can see starting point of where they go, and the mass of it is going up through Ohio. Now look at the arrows and see where they end up. These arrows are ending up in Canada, not just in the north, because as we'll talk about or have talked about, slave catchers could go up to the north and could go into these states. But once they get into Canada, well, that's a little bit different because they could be in a new country and the rules of the United States did not apply there. And some went down south, some went into South America, and then you see some going into your Bahamian Islands out in the Atlantic, into the Atlantic as well. But no one's really running down south. You look here, this is only one because, well, it's easier just to go in this direction. So it's neither underground nor railroad, as I said. Instead, it's a series of escape routes to get to the north. You have this term called the railroad, and they use some terms like station and conductor here in a second that we use on, well, talking about trains. So what would happen is you would have a path in which slaves would try to escape. It might be set out ahead of time. It might have messages or places to follow or certain markers or things like that. But the idea is it's going to take you a while to get up to the north. But someone has already done it, and you have some connections, especially with white people, along the way who are going to help you out. All the while, you have people who are trying to capture you. So these stations will be the early hiding places. We have some of these in Hardin County. If you've ever been down to Piper Station, which is just east of Kenton, there's a little Piper Station general store there. It's pretty cool. Across the street, owned by Judge Faulkner. That was a stop on the Underground Railroad. It's a hiding spot. So people might have these built-in hiding spots within their cupboards to hide people. And these people were also called conductors. These were people who led others on the Underground Railroad. They, for the most part, were escaped slaves who would go back down into the South, like Harriet Tubman, we'll talk about here in a second, and guide others to freedom, even oftentimes forsaking their own freedom in order to do so. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time trying to get to the north if you don't have some kind of a help. So several of your main conductors, first guy was Levi Coffin, an Ohioan. Levi Coffin led 3,000 fugitives to freedom. Now, one of the reasons why he was able to have so many is because he lived across the Ohio River. He was able to transport slaves back and forth across the river, which is a big river. It's not like a little creek or like the Scioto or anything, but the Ohio River is big, but to get a lot of slaves across. So 3,000 fugitives, quite a bit, and we applaud him. And then you have Harriet Tubman, a great story, great movie called Harriet that just came out last year. It talks about her trials and tribulations of not only being a slave, but escaping herself, and then coming back down to the South to free her family, but also a lot of others. You can see this as an actual picture of Harriet Tubman here. She was called Black Moses. She led 300 people out, and she never lost one. So much like Moses of the old days in the book of Exodus in the Bible, leading people out from the south to the north. And this picture's true. She had carried a shotgun. She had a bounty on her head. People wanted her killed. They knew who she was, but they just couldn't find her. And she's able to leave 300 of her own people out, never losing one. $40,000 bounty on her head. That's quite a bit back at the time period. So you have reform for slavery at this time period. It doesn't mean that it's going to change quite yet. Because our next set of notes, the last one of the week will be on Wednesday, tomorrow, we're going to talk about the tensions within Washington, D.C. and what has been done in terms of slavery, like the idea of popular sovereignty, Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, John Brown, things like that, that are going to lead us further and further towards the Civil War. So hopefully the audio works this time around, and that we don't have any problems with it. So tomorrow, see you later.